Ahead of the mini-budget tomorrow, let's bring in Economist Xhanti Phayi. Xhanti, thank you so much for joining us. I think you probably heard Caleb Kasim there talking about the shocking results. I mean, 24 billion rand in just 1 year, which is doubling the debt they incurred in the previous year. I guess not a surprise because we know how bad load shedding was, but what is it going to do to the overall fiscal picture, bearing in mind that the government's already instituted this bailout since February?
Absolutely, Sally, and good evening to the listeners. It's a really critical problem because, as the finance minister had said, they're trying to help take over some of the debt from Eskom. And so the point was actually that they can actually go out there and be able to raise funding for to be able to do the work they need to do, whether it's refurbishing the power stations that they need to, or to support its restructure. And so this tells us that that restructure is going to be hard. And there are two things really that it talks about that are quite important. The first one, of course, is the load shedding. And the load shedding really tells us that they have not been able to make the revenue they would be making, because if they take us out of the power system, it means that we're not buying the product that they're selling, but they are incurring the costs. Because remember, they still have to, to pay the same people that work at Eskom. They still have to rent the building. They still have to do everything else, and of course, continue to refurbish the infrastructure. And so the important thing here is that really the difficulty with load shedding is that you continue to run the cost, but you are not making the revenue you should be making to be able to pay for those costs. And another thing also mentioned that despite the increase that they took from consumers this year, they are still incurring losses, and those losses, of course, what actually translated to debt.
And of course, the load shedding, the power cuts have a huge impact on our economy, from small business right the way up. So something has to be done. He did signal that perhaps things were getting a bit better, but the truth is we're going to be dealing with these losses for a very long time. And then Transnet, of course, is another state utility that absolutely has to function properly to make our economy function properly. And we've seen the impact of our freight rail collapsing, essentially, that we've lost out on a lot of the commodities boom that we could have capitalized on perhaps more. And suggestions are that they need a bailout as well. I mean, surely Enoch Godongwana must be in shreds trying to figure this all out.
Indeed, and remember, Sally, that at the beginning of the year when you did that budget in February, one of the things, because when you do a budget, you say, we expect this growth, we expect to collect this much money, but these are the risks to that outlook. And one of the main things that he highlighted, of course, was the growth picture and the performance of the entities that need to support that growth. And especially, we've also talked about those entities actually needed bailouts. And so everything that there are other things that you mentioned, and what really we're learning from is that everything that you predicted might start from being able to keep that budget and that outlook of the budget alive will all come to fruition. So there is now Eskom comes into the picture. We know that Transnet has already said they need a bailout. They already said, look, we can't do this alone. Remember, they're also returning R1 billion every month in interest costs. So they've got a big problem with debt. Eskom is now adding to that debt and that trouble. And then, of course, we are seeing that, even the global market in terms of being able to lend us money that looks very different, because we are competing now with countries like France who are not borrowing, countries like the US who need to borrow. So we are coming into a very difficult moment. And so the minister now has to tell us, what is the planning to do now that all these worst nightmares have come true? Because that's really what he's now pretending with, to say, look, we had good expectations, we were hoping for better, and everything we thought would not work at least as well as work at least.
Yeah.
What do we do?
Yeah, and let's not forget as well that in February the minister said we've budgeted 3.5% for civil servants, and at the end of the day, they were given double that, which also didn't help us. It was interesting listening to the president last night when he was talking about the economy, because he was quite upbeat. He was talking about infrastructure projects that are underway, load shedding is decreasing, which we have seen a decrease, PRASA reopening a number of rail corridors. And something that BUSA, Business Unity of South Africa, said this afternoon is that what's important, not just major budget cuts, but also for the government to speak with one voice. We have to have an eye on the election next year. And I'm wondering if the president really was sounding the right note for fiscal prudence in his tone last night, because the reality is the finance minister is pretty adamant that things are going to get quite tough in terms of trimming the fat. But will the cabinet agree with him in an election year? And will they all speak with one voice, do you think?
That's an interesting question, because PwC did some numbers, because of course the numbers for the September month have come out, and they are suggesting that really the picture is looking rather bleak. It turns out in our calculation at least that we probably are going to see a 50 billion rand shortfall. That's on top of in terms of tax collections. That is obviously on the back of the increase in spending that the minister is very worried about, because he's saying actually spending is not slowing down as he has been requesting, but it's quickening. And that's something, of course, that if you're having this shortfall in expenditure, tax, and then of course expenditure is going up, and of course you quite right to say, and that this within an election year, that slippage is going to happen at this time. This is of course a very, very big cause for worry. So certainly, is there a way that perhaps the president is able to convince his peers in cabinet that if we don't move properly in this way, and I suspect he's probably the only person who can do this effectively better than the minister, because the minister, of course, is the advisor, and the president has to take final decisions with his cabinet in terms of what has to be done. And that's probably the very difficult situation that we're in. And the president did, the Minister of Finance did mention that it looks like we can run out of money if we continue the trajectory that we're going in.
I mean, when your finance minister says that, it's really deeply worrying. And tell me what our options are, because one of the things we're hearing a lot about at the moment is that South Africa should perhaps draw down on its gold and foreign exchange reserves. Now, there's pros and cons to this, but we do have a lot of gold stowed away. Do you think it's a realistic option?
It's not really a realistic option, because those people, for a particular reason, they are meant to really hold confidence in our financial system, they also to help us, because we keep them to say, if there to be a crisis, we will be able to withstand that crisis, for example, in terms of the exchange rate. So we say we need to hold this on so that we can still be able to import things. Should the currency have problems, we will be able to sell them down, we'll be able to continue to be able, for example, to import petrol, things that we may not have. So that is very, very important. It's a critical measure for the people, for everybody who's looking at South Africa and is doing business with us, that we have sound reserves that can allow us to withstand global crisis, financial crisis, and those types. So if we start to spend it now on lower salaries, then that actually endangers us and may quicken the crisis that we are facing. But to your question about what we need to do, look, also, on the fact that perhaps what is important is to start to think about what role business, communities, and government can work together to actually fund, finance, and retain infrastructure. Because, of course, the money we need to spend on infrastructure is very, very important, because the services both a growing and inclusive economy. And at a time when the fiscus is in the trouble that it is, one wants to actually come together and say, how do we actually support it in a manner that is much more sustainable and co-funding some of this infrastructure?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we don't struggle.
Yeah, sorry, we seem to be losing you just at the end of the interview, but I think what you were saying is speaking to partnerships and all hands on deck, really, to get through this really difficult place we are at. And we'll all certainly be watching tomorrow when the Finance Minister delivers that medium-term budget policy statement. Thank you so much, Economist Xhanti Phayi. Let's continue.